Chapter 18, Dezembro 2011. 2 days till 2011 ends. Cloud similar to the soft white down of a duck nestles between mountain ridges. Unblemished, clean. We choose to see a lake of dreams before us, and not to be mocked by the purity which is a stark contrast to the deep red stain which seeped into feathers and left life collecting in a pool. A farewell to last month. A lake of dreams. We walk more frequently and more varied routes now that we have a dog. And one morning, the three of us are on the road above our home, looking down on small villages, Villanova and Miranda de Corvo. Cutting through patches of brambles and copses of trees to reach our world above the cloud, we come into contact with spiders' webs, and although many of these can be seen shimmering in the early light, many find their sticky way to our noses and chins, because our hands have no wish to leave warm pockets and push them aside. The body of water beneath us is that of mist and cloud, which frequently obscures the fields and road beyond our garden wall, now that winter has arrived, and the earth's warm breath meets the cold night air. The idea of a lake is emphasized by a line of treetops which, at the highest point of their earthbound forms, peep above the mist and are a barrier to the water cascading over it. Above the cloud and mist the air is clear, and the sky over our heads is blue and bright, with a narrow silver banner trailing behind the equally shiny fuselage of a plane, taking people from or bringing them to Portugal, the country in which our dreams are taking shape. Responsibility. After a year of living here, Stephen knew every sound that drifted to us throughout the day or night in our home. No doubt his trained ear for music had something to do with this, but in those early hours of the last day of November, he heard a sound he did not know. What was that? I had been sleeping and heard nothing, but Stephen was at the bedroom window which overlooked the part of the garden where the ducks lived. I heard something in the garden. I'm going down to see if Patrick and Patricia are all right, he continued. I was convinced that there was nothing to worry about, but I got out of bed and made my way to the window while Stephen went downstairs to get a torch. By the time I reached Stephen, he was cradling Patricia in his arms. She looked unharmed, but on the ground below the two forms was a dark red stain, and as I put an arm around Stephen, I noticed a similar red stain spreading out on his dressing gown where he clutched the duck against his chest. It was the sight of Patrick which was more distressing, as he bobbed around in water, reddening by the second from blood which streams down his neck and over his wings. We didn't really know what to do, but I took an old sheet from the lemon room and lifted Patrick from the water, and Stephen and I carried the ducks into the kitchen. From previous experiences with people and pets, with the exception of goldfish, the usual thing when dealing with shock was to keep the victims warm, but this seemed to contradict the knowledge that our ducks were at home in cold water. As I cleaned Patrick up, I discovered that the blood came from 2 puncture marks either side of his neck, and he remained agitated. But it was a relief to learn that the slow trickle of red had appeared worse than it was because of wet feathers which had abetted its course down his body. Patricia was in the worst state, and from where she sat motionless with Stephen on the kitchen floor, her neck lacked the strength to carry the weight of her head, causing her head to look at us from eyes which were tilted on the side. But she was calm and she was alive. We returned to our bed an hour and a half after leaving it. In the kitchen, we had tried to make the most severely injured duck comfortable by propping her in an upright position among some straw in a cardboard box turned on its side. And though the male duck was calmer by this time, we said our good nights and goodbyes. He remained alert where he sat under one of the dining table chairs. We had been prepared for the worst, and so it surprised us in the morning when we found both Patrick and Patricia alive. Sometime during the hours they had been alone, Patrick had lain beside his companion, and this usual behaviour helped us to feel that the greater danger had passed. The feathered family stayed in the kitchen the rest of the day, and we used our clothes horse as a barrier to stop a very inquisitive Merlina, while Muffin and Biscuit ignored the ducks as much as ever. We moved Patricia 5, 6, 7 times throughout the day in order to help her eat or drink something, and as the red stain followed her from place to place, we lost hope that she would recover. She died sometime between our farewells to her on the last day of November, and finding Patrick nestled up against her still body on the morning of the first day of a new month. Stephen and I realised more than ever the responsibility caring for something or someone brings with it. We had given food, we had provided shelter, we had allowed the ducks a more cushioned life than they would have had in their wild or with many of our neighbours. But when they were under attack, they had no large body of water to take flight to, just a small bowl into which only one of them could fit at a time. Later that day, in the garden, we lifted out the pool, dug a hole, and placed Patricia in it before covering the body over and replacing the large bowl. Throughout the funeral, Patrick looked on and made similar mournful sounds to the ones he had made when we had taken the unfertilised eggs away from him and his mate. After 2 days, when we were sure that whatever had attacked him and Patsy would have lost interest and moved on, we moved the surviving duck back into the garden. The burial under the pond had been to ensure the body would not be dug up, and when Patrick was returned outside, we were not prepared to take chances on a further incident. Stephen and I moved out of our bedroom into the lemon room with Marina, Muffin and Biscuit, just a couple of metres away from Patrick. We slept there for only 3 nights, but it was many weeks before we dared sleep with the window of our bedroom closed to the sounds of the garden, and a torch became a fixture at the side of the bed. Christmas is for life, not just for a day. In different circumstances, Stephen would have put up the Christmas decorations, retrieved seasonal CDs from the storage boxes under the bed, placed films such as White Christmas by the DVD player, and had us eating rich fruitcake as soon as December had arrived. However, we waited until the second Sunday of the month before the above came into being, and in the interim we learnt that the Portuguese were just as charitable as the British are at this time of year, but the approach was different. In the lead up to Christmas in the UK, we were used to the Children in Need appeal, and every year a large sum of money was raised for good causes. And in Portugal too, when money was being spent on luxury items and gifts, people were reminded of those less fortunate than themselves. Initially, we had not understood what was happening when we entered a supermarket and was offered a carrier bag before beginning our shop, and out of habit, we declined the proffered item. sure that something would be required of us and not knowing if we wanted to participate. The food bank event, which occurs across Portugal for a week or so, reminded me of the Harvest Festival events from when I was in junior school and we were encouraged to take into class a tin of peaches or such, which was then distributed to some institute such as an old people's home. For us, the contrast between the build up to the previous Christmas and the lead up to this one was marked. 2010 had been a year in which many things needed to take precedent over Christmas. And though the day itself was wonderful, the excitement during its approach had been absent. In 2011, on the other hand, it was around the middle of the month when we began our Christmas, and it started with a trip to the woods. We had originally planned to buy a Christmas tree, either from a garden centre or the Wednesday market. But scouting trips had negated these ideas because we could not find what Stephen had in mind to purchase. A common sense suggestion from Manuel T provided an alternative way of acquiring our tree. So certain that we were not doing any harm, but nonetheless not wishing to broadcast our actions, just in case, we chose a quiet part of a quiet day and drove to a quiet spot. We parked the car along the road near a thick copse of young pine trees, and from the boot of the car, where the seats had already been folded down, Stephen took out the saw we had brought along. It took very little time to decide on a tree, and it was soon in the back of the car. When we arrived back home, Melina showed great interest in the part of the forest which now stood in our kitchen. And once our Christmas tree was in position beside the dining table, in a tall, narrow bucket which Lou and Carlos had brought a plant over to us in, the puppy ran around it and us. The boxes of decorations, which were tantalising low enough to rest a snout on, but with the sides too high to see what was inside, were another source of curiosity for the young dog. And she had to wait for the tinsel, baubles, ornaments and lights to emerge before her curiosity was sated. Supported by broken brick, stones and earth which filled the bucket, our tree stood proud all Christmas, and with rare exceptions, the adornments upon its branches stayed in place. Excuse me. An unexpected gift came from Chicken John. One Saturday, when I was feeding and cleaning out the chickens, as the kettle in the kitchen boiled to make some tea, Stephen was presented with a container of coins and asked to count them. The loose change had been accumulated throughout the year, and a little over 40 euros had been collected, which John gave to us for Christmas presents. Excuse me again. We initially asked Isabel at the kiosk if she wanted all these coins in exchange for something easy for us to use. But we were directed to the cafe on the square. Julia accepted the assortment of coins without counting a penny, taking us on our word that the envelopes which we had diligently counted denominations into did indeed contain what we had written on them. With other money we had built up on our supermarket loyalty cards, we planned to spoil ourselves a little. And so we sat down and made a list of luxury food we would buy. A tin of biscuits, after 8 mints and cheddar cheese, for example. We spent hours gazing through Nigella's Christmas book. And I followed the recipe to make chili jam using our homegrown peppers. The same book was used to help with the pastry for mince pies. though the filling came from jars Stephen's sister Christine had brought with her in September. When I was a child, my brother and I always made chocolate logs for Christmas, while Mum and then my sister Kim made the Christmas cake and Christmas puddings. And now, for the first time in many years, I made a beautiful looking Yule log, once again with Nigella Lawson's help in the kitchen. Stephen chose Edith Vieira through her book The Taste of Portugal to instruct him in the ways of making a Boda de Natal. And this traditional Portuguese Christmas cake admirably complemented my trip down memory lane as our Yule log and the cake were on the festive table. Along with the food, we allowed ourselves a budget of €10 each for Christmas presents, and armed with our gift money, we drove to the Forum shopping centre in Coimbra, where we parted company after agreeing a time to meet up again. I was not very original in my thinking, but splashed out on a pair of boxer shorts from Massimo Dutti instead of from a market stall, and a diary in a format identical to the one Stephen had bought himself at the beginning of the year to keep track of his lessons. My husband was more imaginative and purchased half a dozen small objects for me, amongst which was a chocolate snowman on a stick and a writing pad. When it came to the big day, we discovered that here in Portugal, Christmas is celebrated on the 24th of December. Food preparation, along with last-minute present buying, occurred throughout the morning and afternoon, and from speaking with our neighbours, we knew that they would be with family for Christmas dinner that night, and again the following morning for breakfast. With our neighbours' plans in mind, we decided on 3 o'clock to take our gifts of chili jam and some mince pies around to their houses. I wanted to give our thanks for the help and friendship we had found as much as Stephen did, but I was worried about looking silly handing these small items over, and left to my own devices, I would have delivered them under the cover of night or very early morning. But Stephen's openness would not allow this. So the Major Maria's house was our first stop. Maria's daughter-in-law was in the kitchen preparing Christmas dinner, and our neighbour was sitting down beside the fire. Although, as the family had grown, Maria and the Major's two daughters had settled close by, their son had moved to Lisbon for work many years before, so this was the first time we had met this part of the family. We handed over the presents, which we hoped expressed the sentiment behind them, and in return we were offered a glass of port and some biscuits. The next person we called on was Natalia, with whom we had exchanged an increasing amount of words as she passed our gates on her way to or from visiting Maria. This neighbour too was preparing food for later that evening, but stopped what she was doing and invited us in. While we sat and drank coffee, which was accompanied by traditional fried cakes made from pumpkin, Natalia's two 20-something grandsons popped in and out, taking or bringing items of food. We called on Maneltes next, but he was not there, and we left some mince pies and a note tied to his door handle before going into the house of Pedro and onto the house of Pedro and Lourdes, only to discover that they too were elsewhere. Making our way home, we looped around to the main road and left further pies for Manuel J and his family. But before turning down the lane towards our home, we saw Manuel T at his brother's house a little way beyond. After being beckoned over, we were invited to share in the wine which was being consumed in the garden area alongside the house. Following the visit to the Major and Maria, we had decided to take Merlina with us on our stroll around the village. She had generally been well behaved, but a few anxious minutes followed her disappearance while we were talking with Manuel T. Duarte and his sons. She returned after a few minutes, very happy with a bone we hoped she had been given and not stolen. We reached home over a couple of hours after leaving it, and as the setting sun brought the chill, we lit the fire, had showers, and put the kettle on. While the water was boiling, there was a rattle at our gate, and the Major and Maria's daughter Lourdes came into the garden conveying Christmas wishes and a bowl of hot pumpkin doughnuts, like the ones we had tasted earlier that afternoon. We had a quieter Christmas Eve than those around us, settling down with tea, pumpkin cakes, and Scrooge. We rose the following morning, and similar to the Christmas morning a year earlier, we went downstairs, lit the fire, and sent text messages to our family arranging times to Skype. However, it had not been only I who had been working with Nigella in the kitchen, and unlike the previous year, Stephen added the wet ingredients to the pre-prepared Christmas morning muffins, which we ate while opening presents. Of course, another addition to proceedings this year was our 3-month-old bundle of mischief, and thanks to our sister-in-law Carol, Melina had her own present, which was a squeaky toy Santa. And along with the sounds of paper ripping and logs crackling, this made up our Christmas morning symphony. Our day was magical, and the only negative aspect came, and for the most part, went early in the day, when on returning downstairs after washing and dressing, Stephen came eye to eye with the guilty upward glances of Merlina. Our puppy was attached to the corner of his diary, and for a brief period the scolding she received from Stephen drowned out everything else. Fortunately, with a roast dinner to prepare and even more Christmas films to watch on DVD, the incident was overshadowed and we had the Christmas day we wanted. The line our two English friends, Mary and John, had drawn between each other in reference to friendship and work continued to be blurred in our minds, and a good example was Christmas Day. We knew from speaking to both that in all likelihood they would spend it alone, and we also believed that they did not particularly relish the fact. It appeared that they had not considered spending Christmas together, and though Stephen and I had discussed the idea of sharing our dinner with them, it was not what we wanted to do, and we stayed resolute. As a compromise to our consciences, we extended hands of friendship and invited Mary and John to dinner on Boxing Day instead. We had also asked Manuel T to join us on the 26th, but although he initially accepted, he changed his mind as it was an English dining table accompanied by songs. But although he initially accepted, he changed his mind, and it was an English dining table accompanied by songs from the Muppets Christmas Carol, which was playing on DVD in the winter room. Same time, same place, a world of difference. Between Boxing Day and the end of the year, Joyce and Steve returned to their house next door. We spent an evening at their place, the four of us catching up on happenings since they were last here. And when Stephen and I said that we planned to see in the new year on our veranda once more, it was agreed that our part-time neighbours would join us. During the daytime of the 31st, the two of us drove about 40 minutes to visit a castle. The drive was relaxed and enjoyable, and we covered the first part of the journey on roads which we took when we visited Tomar. The winter sunshine was present more often than not in the game of hide and seek it played with the few clouds it found, and there were occasions when we appeared to be racing the shadows which were cast on the landscape. On arriving in Pombal, we parked the car at the side of the road, only a little distance from where a path wound its way to the walls of the fortress. We walked the perimeter of the castle and read a notice on the door that explained the building was closed for work to improve access and amenities, which explained the metal fencing blocking some paths through the gardens. We wore our coats and scarves, but it was warm enough to shed these before we sat down on the wall and I swung my legs over the side where grassy slopes fell away towards the level of the road. Stephen took our flask of coffee out of the bag we carried, and I poured this while he unpacked cheese sandwiches and a couple of pieces of Edith Vieira's bolo de Natal. We did not see much of the small city that we were in that day, but the following year we returned on a couple of occasions, once with Stephen's parents and nephew, and again almost a year later with other family and friends. Before returning home, we stopped off at a supermarket and bought a few bottles of wine, making sure we had some white in the house for Joyce. Our neighbours rattled our gate around 8:30, Joyce carrying a bottle of spumante to toast in the new year with fizz. We passed most of the evening in the winter room, and then, with only an hour left of 2011, I put some potato wedges, seasoned with our own chilies, into the oven, and the four of us decamped to the veranda. We welcomed in the new year in the place we had greeted the one we were leaving behind. We were a year older, a year wiser, and a year more settled. Our finances were stable, and the relationship we were building more so.